Attorney Ferry. I am your divorce, custody, and child support attorney in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, so today I want to talk to you about the different reasons that you can request a Georgia court to grant you a divorce. There are 13 different reasons. So if you've been thinking about whether or not your reasons for wanting a divorce are valid, well, I'll give you 13 different reasons why you can be granted a divorce in Georgia. All right, so here we go. The first reason under Georgia law, reason number one for granting a divorce is if there is intermarriage by persons within the prohibited degrees of consanguinity or affinity. That is a long and fancy way of just saying you married your cousin. So if you found out that you ended up marrying your cousin or a half brother or half sibling, you absolutely can get a divorce in Georgia. And it's also the basis for getting an annulment. Reason number two, if there is mental incapacity at the time of the marriage. If when you were married, either yourself or your spouse did not have the mental capacity to enter into this contract of marriage or to say I do, for example, if you got married in Vegas and when you all were married, you were both under the influence, that's certainly a reason, but you have to prove that at the time that you all both said I do, that there was some sort of mental incapacitation. So that's pretty difficult to prove generally. You would probably have to have some witnesses there to prove that. But essentially, that is a reason you can get a divorce, and that's also a basis for getting an annulment. Reason number three, impotency at the time of the marriage is also a basis for getting a divorce. Essentially, it just means that during the time of the marriage or the time that you said I do, you were feeble-minded, you were weak, you didn't truly understand what was going on, and you didn't have the ability to move forward because of the state that you were in. Also a reason that you can request an annulment of your marriage as well. Reason number four, if there was force, menace, duress, or fraud in obtaining the marriage. So essentially, if you were conned into marrying your spouse, or if you essentially were under some pressure, your spouse threaten you and threaten to commit bodily harm or threaten to assault you, essentially put a gun to your head to marry him or her, that is certainly a reason that you can request a divorce. Also, it's a basis for you to get an annulment. Reason number five, pregnancy of the wife by a man other than the husband at the time of the marriage, unknown to the husband. So basically, fellas, if you find out that at the time that you married your wife, that she was in fact pregnant with another man's child and you had no idea, the key here is that you did not know that she was pregnant with another man's child at the time that you all said I do. If that is certainly the case, that is reason number five that you can request a divorce from your wife. Reason number six, adultery in either of the parties after marriage. Everyone is familiar with this basis. Essentially, it's the basis where you are just alleging that your spouse cheated, with someone else during the marriage. And under this basis, you do have to prove that there was sexual intercourse, not just your spouse was holding hands with someone walking through the park, not just your spouse was had the googly eyes and smiling at his coworker. There has to be hardcore proof that there was sexual intercourse during the marriage. And it does apply in homosexual relationships as well as heterosexual relationships. So we're not going to get down to the definition of what sexual intercourse means, but it does apply whether it's a homosexual relation or a heterosexual relation. Reason number seven, willful and continued desertion by either of the parties for the term of 1 year. Essentially, what you're saying is that your spouse abandoned the marriage without your consent, meaning your spouse left the household, Or if you all are still living together, there is no conjugal relations. Your spouse is refusing to have any type of interaction with you. Your spouse has been gone. Your spouse has intentionally abandoned you in your marriage. Now, it has to be a situation where it was without your consent. What that means is that if you ran your husband away and changed the locks and told him to get out, or if you told your wife it's over and you wanted her to leave, that's not abandonment, because you're the one that requested that. The abandonment or the desertion of the marriage has to be a situation where it was willful by the other person, but it was not with your consent. That's the key there. Desertion of the marriage. Reason number 8. The conviction of either party for an offense involving moral turpitude, under which he is sentenced to imprisonment in a penal institution for a term of 2 years or longer. Essentially, what this means is that your spouse has been convicted of a crime like rape or murder or sodomy or aggravated sexual battery or assault. In other words, any crime that involves moral turpitude. And it's not just enough that your spouse has been arrested for that crime, but it is required that your spouse has been convicted and sentenced of a term of up to, more than 2 years, 2 years or more. Reason number 9, habitual intoxication. If your spouse is just a drunk and your spouse is habitually a drunk, essentially you can be granted a divorce. And it has to be ongoing intoxication, meaning if your spouse just comes home a night or two during the week and likes to relax and unwind and have a beer or drink a whole bottle of wine, that's not necessarily considered habitual intoxication. But if your spouse, for example, has been drinking every single night for the past year, and they're drunk every night, but they go to work in the morning and they can teach, at work, and they can function just fine, but at night they're drinking for the past 365 days, that would be considered habitual intoxication. And that can be a reason for you to be granted a divorce. Reason number 10, cruel treatment, which shall consist of the willful infliction of pain, bodily or mental, upon the complaining party, such as reasonably justifies apprehension of danger to life, limb, or health. Cruel treatment just means that your spouse is just downright ugly and nasty to you. That's being verbally abusive, mentally abusive, physically abusive, emotionally abusive. It can be yelling, nagging, throwing things, just essentially putting you in a state where your health and your liberty and your livelihood is at risk. So if you believe there's some cruel treatment taking place in your marriage, that can be a basis to have a divorce granted. Reason number 11, incurable mental illness. What this means is that your spouse has been deemed just mentally ill or incompetent, and not just by you, or not just by friends and family, but it has to be a court of competent jurisdiction who has deemed that your spouse is mentally incompetent. Also, it has to be a situation where your spouse has been institutionalized in a mental health facility for at least the past 2 years before you decide to file a divorce. And so if your spouse has been institutionalized, the court has deemed your spouse mentally ill, and the third requirement is that mental illness is not curable, then that can be a basis for also granting you a divorce. Reason number 12, habitual drug addiction. If your spouse is getting high every single day for the past 365 days, or your spouse is using some sort of recreational drug that's not prescribed, essentially you can request that you be granted a divorce on those grounds. Reason number 13 about the marriage is irretrievably broken is simply the catch-all basis, is what I call it. Some states call it irreconcilable differences. And essentially, this is the no-fault grounds, is what we call it, meaning there's no fault by either spouse. The wife isn't saying it's the husband's fault. The husband isn't saying it's the wife's fault. Essentially, what you are saying to the court is, Judge, we just can no longer live together as husband and wife, and there's no hope that we will reconcile and get back together. So it could be any reason. You probably grew apart, you fell out of love, you just don't want to be married anymore. It essentially is just telling the court you're done. So those are 13 different reasons why you can be granted a divorce. If you believe that you are entitled to a divorce on more than one grounds and more than one basis, I highly recommend that you talk to an attorney first before moving forward with filing your divorce. And of course, hiring an attorney will help you get through this tough time in your life. So those are 13 different reasons. Continue to follow us on social media, follow our Facebook page, make sure you like us on Instagram, and also tune in to our YouTube channel. Talk to you soon. Bye.